Welcome to the Binary Agora. I'm your host, Alba Rivera Martinez, and I was thinking that when we talk and we interact with AI systems and especially with AI chatbots, we tend, I would say, to isolate ourselves, thinking that we have this one-on-one relationship with the machine. However, reality is far from this. AI systems are not available for us to interact with, to ask, for instance, for recipes or for the brands of cars, but they are applied on a daily basis in real life environments to make consequential decisions. For instance, when a government's algorithm decides that you pose a threat at a border crossing. And as opposed to our interactions with the chatbots, our instinct points to the fact that there is indeed a human in the loop involved in the decision making. And today we're going to explore this concept of human in the loop with Melanie Fink. She's an associate professor of European law at Leiden University, and her earlier work examined Frontex, so the EU's border agency, where she showed how responsibility for human rights violations could be passed between the agency and the member states until it effectively dissolved. And that experience of accountability without accountability led her into researching the problems relating to human in the loop as applied to AI systems in the hands of public authority. And whilst the assumption is that human presence preserves dignity and also enables explanation, Melanie's work asks whether that assumption holds. So welcome to the Agora, Melanie.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you with us. When we hear about a human in the loop, the image that it conjures is of a person checking the AI system's work for it before anything consequential happens. So I wanted to ask you first, how well does that image fare with reality?
Yeah, that's definitely the image we have in mind, right? Like a person sitting there doing maybe a very satisfying rubber stamp in the end. Actually, when we look closely, though, the image looks very different for every person, depending on what context you're thinking about. Are you thinking about you're in a hospital? Are you in a court? Are you in a huge content moderation context? So everyone tends to ultimately have a very different image in their head of what a human in the loop might be, how that might look like. It's actually worth pausing and thinking, wait, what do we actually mean with a human in the loop? So we have no legal definition of what that is. That, of course, contributes to the fact that everyone tends to speak of something slightly different. And the AI Act doesn't even use that term. It uses the term human oversight. Basically, at its very core means is that there is a natural person exercising some sort of supervision over an algorithmic work process. But that leaves a lot open. It leaves open, well, when is that human supposed to be in the loop? Is it at the early training, the science stages, during the operation of the AI system? Is it kind of as a review possibility? And it also leaves open how in depth that human is supposed to look at this output. Do you just sort of glance at it and see whether it is totally outrageous, or do you really kind of double check every little thing? That, of course, makes quite a huge difference. Are you talking about an engineer at the training stage? Are you talking about a public servant really going through every single output and seeing whether it holds up or not? Overall, I guess even the question that we often ask, is there a human in the loop? Should there be a human in the loop? Is maybe not exactly the right question. And maybe it should be more like, well, what kind of human in the loop do we want here? And is that what we can achieve, or how does the reality then correspond to that?
I have worked in a public authority for some time at the Spanish Competition Authority, and I imagine that reconciling this role of civil servants, officials, with the decisions made by an AI system is quite difficult, especially because there's an inherent tension between those relationships and the decisions that get churned out in the end, because the official is in the end responsible for making the decision, information, but also is in charge of explaining a system that they may not fully understand. For instance, going back to what you were saying, officials may not be engineers and may not know how to explain how that system works in the back end. Going to this question of what kind of human in the loop we need for each context, I wanted to ask you, how can we establish the adequate safeguards to ensure that integrating this human in the loop within these algorithmic decisions that are being made is not just this rubber stamping exercise that we were referencing at the start?
Yeah, that's something we definitely want to avoid. So you rightly pointed out there is this tension, right, between kind of formal responsibility and actual agency in a way, like the civil servant. If we talk about the public authorities context, the civil servant has the responsibility to take the decision according to their training, expertise, values, but also carries then the accountability for it, or even liability, depending on the context. At the same time, you might not have this actual agency. That's a tension that's really relevant for the law, because all our mechanisms for accountability just assume that there was agency, that there was a possibility for choice, that you could have done differently, basically. And because you did not, you are accountable and carry the consequences. So the reality is, if it's just a rubber stamping exercise with this gap between responsibility and agency, what added value does that human have? So you really want to avoid that. We know what we don't want, but I guess the question is, what do we want instead? Okay, we don't want rubber stamping, but what do we want then this human to do really? And that's a question we don't often ask ourselves. It gets a bit fuzzy, just to be there, sort of, and do something meaningful, something effective. I like categorizing things, so I like
As a good academic will.
Yeah, right. So I like to think of the many different types of things that this human could be doing in terms of three kind of categories or buckets, if you want. And the first one is output related. That means, okay, you have that human there to catch errors, correct undesirable outcomes, even exercise maybe value judgment where we want that. That's this first category of roles. And then the second one is more process oriented. It's putting that human in charge of ensuring, for instance, that I can exercise my procedural right as an individual being, if you want, the ear for me to exercise my right to be heard. Yeah, and then there is a third category as well. That's the accountability oriented, let's call it, bucket. And that's simply to ensure that there is someone that can be held accountable should things go wrong, since machines cannot, in this sense, be held accountable. And these are very different asks and require very different types of training, expertise, understanding of the system. And the last one is, of course, the dangerous one that you were referring to with the rubber stamping exercise, because that's what it ultimately would lead to. Eilish has called this the moral crumple zone. And something I also really like, a picture like in Krotov, Kaminsky, and Nicholson Price's work on human in the loop, they call this the liability sponge role. I love this image because it literally conjures up this idea that that human is there, doesn't really know what to do, but sort of absorbs the liability, but doesn't have really any other role. So the point is, how do we avoid that path, right? And I think the answer really is to be intentional in every single moment, to understand which role am I designing for here? What do I need the human to do here? Do I need the human to check in a way this output? Do I need the human to ensure procedure? What is it really that this human is supposed to do? And from there, I think we can start building our answer and say, aha, to be the ear for me to exercise my procedural rights, I need this type of training, this type of expertise. I need the human to be involved at this moment of the procedure. You see, so we can build from that to concretize the mechanism we need in every every instance.
In that sense, I have two clear examples in mind. So the first one is actually how the Spanish Competition Authority uses AI, which is basically, so Spain has this really great database on public procurement and tenders. So the algorithm basically scans all of the data to spot out where anti-competitive conduct could have happened. So I would say that that would fall within the output related task that the AI does. And then the process oriented and accountability tenets would come in. It's the competition authority who decides, okay, is it adequate to trigger a sanctioning proceeding against this anti-competitive conduct or not? And this is fully accountable on me because I am the one triggering that sanctioning proceeding. And the other example that I would put forward is the example of content moderation. So that's completely different in the sense that it's actually the AI producing the output, making the decision, and it's only the human oversight that comes as an afterthought, especially with these large platforms on your work. And you already said that the AI Act does not mention human in the loop explicitly, but does reference human oversight. And you also analyzed, namely Article 14 of the AI Act, distinguishing three modes of oversight that may overlap with the three tasks that you already mentioned. First, someone who must approve every action. Then there must be some oversight on the monitoring and the intervention with regards to that action. And finally, someone that is involved within the design stage of that AI system. And the AI Act requires oversight during the AI system's use and its design. So I would want to ask you, which of those three modes of oversight is actually feasible to implement for deployers of AI, and how does that look in practice?
That's a good question. So I think the nice thing about Article 14 in the AI Act, the article that sets out the human oversight conditions, it only actually requires it to be effective and proportionate, broadly speaking. And very few additional hard rules are set in place. Now, that's actually a pretty nice approach because, as we just discussed, there isn't one ideal mechanism that will be good for every single decision, simply because the decisions are very different. A parking ticket is not the same as my asylum status determination, right? That requires different types of mechanisms. Then the crucial question is, of course, when do I want which mechanism and how do we draw that line? That's a really hard question to answer. I do think that for the public sector, in any case, we definitely have to go beyond the AI Act, and I would look for answers more in the existing procedural guarantees that we have already in administrative law, in constitutional law, in human rights law, to see where we can get with that. Since we already used it as an example, the right to be heard. You can look at, what does it really require to implement that? Do we need the person at the design stage, at the in-between stage? Is review enough? But this, of course, then raises, maybe we are inclined then to say, well, individuals deserve only the highest standard. And then you reach this dilemma of feasibility. What then do we even need the AI system for if we double check every single thing all the time, super thoroughly? That's just not really feasible. Now, I think this nuance that I just mentioned, that every type of decision can have a different mechanism, is really the way out here. Because if you think about it, if I tell you, well, for your parking ticket stuff, you can go for super low human in the loop requirements, right? Can be really low effort, that doesn't require much. That does free up time, that efficiency gain, if you want, frees up resources in the public authority. And I guess the drive that we see very often with the adoption of AI is, there is more efficiency, so we can do more, right? But that's probably not really the way we want to design our future, if you can say it like that. What we want is maybe to look at this freed up resource, time, very often, and say, what do we want to do with this? And one thing you can do with it is say, well, for the really high stakes decisions, we can actually make them better than before. We can add really substantial, meaningful, extra control mechanisms to ensure that persons feel heard, feel seen, have their moment of interaction to explain their situation, to have that element of citizen-state interaction. So anyway, a very complicated way of saying, I think the feasibility lies also in being able to actually speed up some stuff where the stakes are not so high, so as to be able to be extra careful in the high stakes decisions.
That's a really great approach. Although I'm a bit conflicted with the crux of introducing human in the loop, especially because in your work you have noted that empirical evidence points to significant limitations on the effectiveness of human oversight due to cognitive constraints on one side and also automation biases, which are the tendency, the trend to trust the machine even if you shouldn't, because it does everything automatically for you. So I was thinking, so if the science, and especially in this high stakes decisions, suggests that humans are not quite reliable as overseers of these decisions, what is the legal rationale actually trying to protect when it mandates human involvement?
You're very right. So there is empirical evidence that humans in the loop don't always make the decision better. And sometimes even make it worse, actually. That's a real concern. I think it's worth asking why. Why is that? There is probably at least two interrelated reasons for that. The first one is related to the roles that we were talking about just before. So we were mentioning there is just different things the human can do, but it turns out humans are not equally good at each of these roles. So humans tend to perform better on some roles than they do on others. So for instance, this idea of a human double checking the accuracy of the output, it just doesn't work really well. It's not a great idea because there is a reason, ideally, that we use the AI system, which is that it does something that we feel like we can do that well ourselves. I mean, that's the ideal reason why you would use an AI system to automate tasks, right? So then having that human there to just double check whether this was right just doesn't work. That human will be there and do a bit of, does this look okay? Yeah, I guess so. So what you're doing, you're setting that human in the loop up for failure, right? But humans do much better on other things, like more these procedural types of roles to guarantee human interaction, to guarantee that you can make use of your procedural rights, maybe to even bring in some contextual judgment or spot tiny things that, okay, oh, this is explained by particular factors that explain a certain mistake that you might have made in a form, where this human possibility for contextualization, for these types of things, actually adds value. That's reason number one. We should not just be intentional about what we want a human to do, but also be aware that this is a task that the human in that context can actually fulfill with the time available, because otherwise we're setting this person up for failure. So that's the reason number one. And reason number two, it is related, but even I think if you choose the right role for the right context and the human can actually do it, we should be really careful not to over rely on that human. And you see this in the law happen quite a bit. That human can be helpful and necessary to achieve certain goals, but it's not a panacea for everything. So it should not create a situation where because you put a human into the loop, you say, oh, we don't need other safeguard mechanisms then. Oh, it's okay to have fewer review possibilities. It's okay to basically dial down all our other mechanisms that safeguard good decision making. They should still be there, because even a good mechanism can fail. So you don't want to over rely on this person. To avoid these failures, we have to be careful not to set that human up for failure and not make it the only thing between a great decision and a complete disaster.
Talking about that dichotomy on not setting up the human for failure and avoiding over reliance, you highlight that humans should especially be concerned with the procedural aspects of implementing these decisions coming out from AI systems and AI models. You have also pointed out in your work that a key condition for that is feeling treated like a human being who understands how and why someone arrived at a particular decision. So I was wondering, how can we reconcile that tension in the law as a consequence in the cultural framework, especially because we have this idea that decisions coming out from AI systems might not have that human component.
Yeah, I hinted at this so often that this question was unavoidable. I'm so grateful for it. I think it's a very beautiful question, and it is something that I'm currently working on also. I'm looking into the relationship between receiving an explanation for a decision and feeling treated respectfully and with dignity. More specifically, I'm really interested to find out whether it matters not just what is in that explanation, which is what we tend to focus on, but who gives it. Does it make a difference whether I receive this explanation from a human, the human in the loop, for instance, or whether I receive it sort of from an explainable AI or from ChatGPT? Do we have, or should we have, a right to a human explanation? Yeah, you'll have to wait a few more months, I think, for my very great answer to this. I can give you my take that I am certain about that it will turn on, and that's the following. We tend to focus for explanations on the question of challengeability of a decision. Oh, we need reasons for a decision. We need explanations for a decision so that we can go ahead and build our defense against it to challenge that decision. And that's very important. And actually, AI-generated explanations do a pretty fine job at that, because ultimately it doesn't matter, was it the real reason behind the decision that was in the human's mind? You just need a reason you can defend yourself against. So AI explanations are quite all right for that. But what we are missing with that, and you by the way, you see this in secondary legislation in the EU a lot, be it in the GDPR, in the AI Act, these rights to an explanation, they focus so heavily on making decisions challengeable. What we miss a little bit is a dimension that we are more used to working with, I guess, in public law, which is that explanations serve other purposes too. So the duty to reason, if you want the OG of explanation rights, the duty to reason is also there, for instance, to discipline the decision maker, because we think if you have to give reasons and while you think through this process and have to put it on paper, your decision gets better, right? You revise your reasons while you do that. That's another function. And another function of reason giving is also this other dimension that you were mentioning now in your question already. Reasons that you receive, they show that authority is exercised over you with reasons, that you are a subject, that you are a person deserving of an explanation, that it's not just because I say so type of authority, but reasoned authorities. It's at the very heart of a public system based on the rule of law and the dignity of persons, right? In that area, AI systems don't work so well because they don't conjure up in most people this feeling seen kind of idea. And of course, they also don't discipline the decision maker in that sense. So it does matter who gives the explanation, not because humans are such great explainers. We know there is a lot of limits there too, but because the rules that require explanations and reasons were written with the assumption in mind that this would be a human, right? If you replace that human, you have to really think well how you manage to still fulfill the functions that the rule was intended to fulfill, how these functions can still be met. If I think about the arc that we just went through, yeah, there is a little bit a thread running through it, right? We ask good questions. So, is there a human in the loop? Is it a meaningful one? Is it effective, proportionate? Is this a good explanation? Does it contain what it should contain? These are very good questions and important ones. But sometimes we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, wait, what is this rule for? And how do we best achieve that? Because without that, even a well-intentioned mechanism can fail to fulfill what it was actually supposed to be doing.
With that, paving the way with good intentions. And I think a comment on your last point on AI generated explanations. I'm not really sure whether some of the AI generated explanations will be sufficient and would, for instance, hold
Yeah.
any ground before the courts, because sometimes when you make a question again to the AI model and say, okay, why did you take this particular course of action, or why did you make this decision, or why did you choose this particular product or service, then they say it's just because of this, or I was wrong, or it even acknowledges and says you were right, and in fact this is better for you. And I think that there's also some ground there for researching in terms of challengeability with regards to these human in the loop decisions and how those are explained in the end, but that will be for another episode. Once you have published on the right to human explanation, we can get back to that. And I wanted to thank you, Melanie, for joining us here in the Agora and also sharing all your thoughts, your research, and your insights on this human in the loop discussion.
Thank you so much, Alba.
Thank you. Bye bye.